Okay, this is the third video that gives an example of getting the gist. In this video, we'll talk about getting the gist of this photograph and what are the prompts, what are the questions you want to ask yourself every time you attempt to get the gist. So starting out, again, with a photograph rather than a written piece, you can look at the photograph first and just ask yourself, what do you notice? What do you wonder? The first primary question you want to ask yourself is, who or what is this mainly about? What is the subject of the photograph? And this might be difficult to determine at first. If you're not familiar with this area, or if you're not familiar with the photograph. So it might take some figuring out. Okay. Number two, what is the most important thing the photographer would like us to know or think about? Okay. And so thinking about what is the photographer's perspective? What's the photographer want us to think about? Okay. So what's the most important thing about this subject? So you might say, well, the subject is, I see a building. It looks like an old building. It looks like a, if you know architecture, you might describe it a little bit better. I also see people that might be troops, right, or in the military, something like that. And then you can write a short sentence about that. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about this. And so oftentimes when you see a photograph, if you can determine a little bit more about it, there might be a title or something like that. This was put on Twitter by Martha Raddatz, and you can always look up who is Martha Raddatz, right? If you're on the GED, obviously you can't, but she's a journalist. So what does this journalist want us to know about the Lincoln Memorial? So she's telling us your Lincoln Memorial this evening. So there's a little bit more information. It gives you a date when this photograph was sent out. It was June 2nd. And we know, okay, what was happening in June during that time. So we can think about that. Okay. And then we can think about, how does that information change our answers, right? Well, one, we can then determine what building it is. We know it's the Lincoln Memorial. It was also June of last year, and there were lots of protests at that point. So that might change our answer a little bit. So you can work again on a short sentence thinking about what the gist of this picture is. I'm going to shift this a little bit and give you another picture to consider. It's from a different perspective, also from the Lincoln Memorial. And you have a sign that says Black Lives Matter, kind of in the foreground, which is kind of the front of the photograph. And you've got the Lincoln Memorial in the back. And so what do you want to think about when you think about the Lincoln Memorial? You might think about Abraham Lincoln. You might look up the memorial, right? What does the memorial do or say, right? What is Lincoln famous for, right? Freeing the slaves, that idea. So that might come into play. And then you've got this whole group of people, right, in the foreground, and you can see that they're Black Lives Matter protesters. You could determine that because of the signage, right? So then you might say, well, what is the most important thing the photographer would like us to know? And you can think about what you believe the photographer is trying to say about this subject, right? The subject, the location, the Lincoln Memorial, and also the Black Lives protesters, right? And this was at about the same time in June last year. So what kind of gist statement could I write about this? All right. I want you to think about that. And if you're interested in submitting a gist statement, please feel free to send me one and just let me know what photograph or photographs the gist statement is referring to. Okay, that's it for this example. We'll see you in class.